Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Before we officially get started, we want to make sure that you can see and hear us clearly by following the welcoming steps that you see on your screen. To make sure that you can ask any questions that you'd like, please feel free to use our chat bubble. You can type in the chat box that will pop up on your screen, so that way all of us will be able to see your questions, thoughts, comments, or anything that you'd like to let us know. Please also let us know if you're unable to hear or see us through the chat box as well. And to be able to dial in for audio, press the little phone icon and the call information will come up for you, followed by the conference ID that you were provided with at the time of this webinar. This is a framework for effective teaching, differentiated instruction, facilitated by Diane Fox, alumna of the class of 2008. Diane, I want to thank you so much for joining us. And before we officially get started, I'd like to introduce you to our facilitators for this afternoon's webinar presentation. My name is Taryn. I'm the Associate Director of Alumni Engagement, along with Paige Carbone and Lisa Galasso, our Director and Assistant Director here on St. Joseph's College, Long Island. We're so happy to be here with you today, and please feel free to reach out to us in the chat box if you have any questions or concerns throughout the course of the webinar. Diane Fox, class of 2008, is the Director of Bilingual and Alternative Education in the Hampton Bays Union Free School District. And before we officially get started, we want to tell you a little bit about Diane, who is the last webinar facilitator in our Alumni Webinar Educator series for this summer. She's an educator that works with English language learners and students that need differentiated instruction in an alternative high school setting. Diane believes that each student has the potential to succeed with support from their families, school staff, and the greater community. She has worked in Hampton Bays for 4 years after having taught in a variety of school districts with diverse student populations. Diane has worked in the education field for 9 years as a Spanish teacher, social studies teacher, bilingual social studies teacher, and most recently as a school building and district leader. She has participated in item review analysis for teacher certification exams through the New York State Education Department and has served as a teacher mentor for student teachers completing their coursework to become certified in New York. Diane holds a BA in History and Spanish from St. Joseph's College, an MA in Public Policy from Stony Brook University, and professional certificates in School Building Leadership and School District Leadership from Stony Brook University. Diane, thank you so much for joining us, and we would love for you to get started.
Thanks so much, Taryn. Thank you also to the St. Joseph's College community, the Office of Alumni Engagement, and just everyone that's logged in right now. It's really nice seeing people logging in, and I just hope that this is beneficial for everyone. So let me get started. Taryn did give you an extensive bio, so I appreciate that. And I just wanted to share a little bit of my story before I get into some of the strategies that I've used in the past and some of the strategies that I've seen a lot of my colleagues recently use. As Taryn mentioned, I've taught in a variety of school districts, as you can see listed there, from Rocky Point to Central Islip to Wyandanch, and then now in Hampton Bays. So I've definitely logged in some commuting time on my in my car. But each of these places have added to my experience. Each of these school districts were very different. And what I mean by that is that there were all types of students in these districts. I worked with general ed population. I worked in classrooms that were tagged as inclusion. I've worked in other classrooms that were just strictly E&L students. And I worked in classrooms where it was a bilingual setting with the majority of students that spoke Spanish as their primary language. And I also had students that spoke French Creole. And so I've had that mix of students too, where you have more than 2 languages in the classroom, and the only person that's primary language was English was myself. So challenging, yes, but definitely doable. And all of these different experiences have really just added to my toolbox. And that's what I'm hoping that today's presentation is for all of you. It's a couple of tools that you can add in that you can carry with you into September and that you can use throughout the school year and share out with other colleagues of your own. Something that I want to make sure that each of you understands is that no matter what school district you're in, no matter what classroom or how many years teaching you might have under your belt, every class, every year is different. As you all know, we work with people, we work with human beings, and no classroom is ever going to be the same from year to year. when some strategies might work for some students, it might not work for others, and that's when we as educators just need to kind of think a little bit outside of the box and find other strategies that will help them out. So going into differentiated instruction, we entitled this workshop as such because differentiated instruction is something that we hear a lot about. You know, if you go back to your days in the classroom when we're studying to be educators, we hear it a lot. You see it in textbooks, but sometimes it's easy to forget what that actually means. And I love this infographic here, and I use these a lot, by the way, in the classroom, and I see a lot of colleagues use it. Infographics are so helpful to just get key messages out there to your students. So in this case, I just want us to kind of start off the workshop by focusing on engagement of students, on improving learning outcomes, and helping students learn more efficiently and with deeper understanding, which if you're using today's curriculum, you know it's all about deeper understanding and getting students to get to the content, not so much, you know, focusing on the outside things, but really focusing in on, do they understand the concept? Our classrooms today, what do they look like? As you can see, and this is just a snapshot of one school district, you'll see that a lot of school districts nowadays, the English language learner population has really increased in the last, I want to say, 5 years. In this particular school district, you got 22% English language learners, 12% of students with disabilities, and 61% of students that are economically disadvantaged. These are your students that qualify for free or reduced lunch or breakfast. It goes to show you that no matter where you are, you're always going to have students that have various needs. So how do you find out what your students need? There's a couple of key tasks that you can start off in September with. Doing a survey of your students. So depending on where or how you're teaching, you know, as far as what grade you're teaching, you can do a survey of your students. Even at the elementary school level, you can do a quick survey of who was their teacher last year, finding out what their reading levels are at, having that communication, finding out a little bit about your students before they enter your classroom. If you're in the middle school and high school level, it's a great opportunity to start off the day and start off the school year by asking your students to fill out a survey about themselves. And these questions can include anything from what do you like to be called, if they have a nickname, or if, for example, Michael in your class likes to be called Mike. Or you might have students that learn a certain way, maybe students that, for whatever reason, they need to be in front of the classroom and they need to sit at the front so they can view the board better. So doing a quick survey of your students and asking them questions about themselves will help you guide your instruction. Also sending a note home for parents. A lot of you might send home just a welcome letter, welcome back to the school year. In that letter, make sure you include a little portion, not just for a parent's signature or a guardian's signature, but include a space for parents and guardians to share information about their child. Oftentimes, parents will brag about their child. I know I do with my two little guys. I share information about my child all the time. So why not ask the parents and guardians of your students to share information? It could be positive things about the student. It also could be some of the struggles that that student might have. All this information is going to be beneficial to you. You're going to be able to use it. Make sure that you communicate with your colleagues. Speak if you have in your building a pupil personnel support team. Reach out to those people. It could be a school psychologist, a school social worker, whoever it is that helps to support student learning, you want to reach out to them. And I have it in bold here, but collaborate. Make sure that you're not just on your own in the classroom. If you find yourself struggling, if you find yourself lacking information about students and you want to know more, ask questions. Make sure you ask your colleagues, your building leadership, your support staff. Reach out to people and you're going to find out what those students need. And that's just having all this information is going to make your teaching a lot more effective. So before you even become a teacher, you need to also remember that you are a learner. So as educators, I know for myself, I'm a nerd when it comes to these things, and that's okay. I like reading books about education. I like reading books and journals and magazine articles about new strategies that can be used, what they're doing in other countries possibly that I could use in the classroom or that I could share with some of my colleagues. So some of the ways that you can become a learner yourself, and they're quick and easy, is to join a Twitter chat. And I included a few hashtags there for you to follow. You know, and also a couple of Twitter handles, TeachThought, Edutopia. These types of Twitter handles and hashtags will just help you follow new trends that are happening in education. It doesn't mean you have to use them all, but it's definitely helpful to get some new ideas. Also, reading some different magazines, Education Week, or publications put out by, you know, respected academic journals. So you have ASCD, PDK. These are all ones that you can Google and you'll find some of their links. Also joining professional organizations. So you have the National Education Association, TESOL International. So if you have English language learners in your classroom, make sure you look at TESOL International Association. They have monthly journals that they'll send to you. They'll send you emails on a weekly basis, monthly basis. It's all tools to help out with English language learners. So make sure that you definitely use that one if you have those students in your classroom. And then I included here Join Pinterest. It's one of my favorite pastimes, but I love looking at what other people are doing. I like learning from others. You know, something that people have always said, don't reinvent the wheel. That's the same information I'm giving you today. I don't want you to reinvent the wheel. We're not asking you to come up with all these things on your own. See what other people are doing. If it's working for someone else, it might work for you as well. So once you've become a learner, you know, and you've gotten information from your students, you're starting to follow trends. We have to remember that in order to connect with your students and really have that that relationship in the classroom where students will communicate to you, you can communicate with them, you have to build relationships. So I found this online and I thought it was really interesting as far as how to connect with your students. So from the high fives to asking about their weekend, one of the key ones is smile. I love that one because if you put yourself in the shoes of a student, think about when you enter the classroom. Does that student, you know, would you want to see a teacher that's smiling at you or a teacher that's frowning? You know, you always want to have the happy teacher. So smile. Even if you're having a bad day as an educator, don't bring that into the classroom. That'll bring everything down. That'll bring the mood down. Make sure you smile. Try to remember why you're there in the first place. Try to remember that you're there to help students succeed, to learn, to become lifelong learners. So smile, definitely key. But also, the last one here on how to build relationships with your students. If you have good communication with your students, you'll be able to notice when they're having an off day. And nowadays, with everything that we see going on in different schools and the tragedies that have happened, it's so important to know when your students are having an off day. Even if your students, you know, sometimes we have challenging students that interrupt us when we're trying to do a lesson, or you might have a student that, you know, for whatever reason, they can be distracting to others. It doesn't matter. Notice when they're not acting their usual way. It's really important that when you see that in a student, that you reach out to the student themselves, see if they want to talk to you about it. Maybe something's going on at home, or maybe something outside of school. But you also want to reach out to other colleagues, find out if they've noticed the same trend, reach out to a music teacher or a physical education teacher, and see if the student is acting, you know, off in their classrooms as well. So just always be mindful of that. Always be mindful of your students and how they act on a regular basis and if they ever act out of the norm. So again, how do you learn about your students? The things you want to ask them about. Where are they from? If they're from a different country, you want to know that. Look into it a little bit. Become a researcher. If, for example, I've had students that have come from Spain, and meanwhile, the majority of students that I had that were English language learners were from Latin America and South America. So I didn't really have experience with students from Spain. So what did I do? I asked them questions about it. I would ask them, what kind of school did you go to in Spain? How was the education there? And lo and behold, I had found out the first year that I had one of these students, they told me that they actually, and this was high school students, they told me that they don't change classrooms from period to period. It's the teachers who move. So that was something interesting to hear, that they don't rotate classrooms, but the teachers do. So they'll stay in the same classroom and the teachers move from room to room. Something just a little different, but when they shared that with me, it showed my students that I was learning about them, that I was taking the time to know what their culture, their values, their schooling was like. So those types of things can go a long way with you to forming relationships with your students and finding out about what knowledge do they already bring with them. Oftentimes, students educated in other countries, they might not be studying the same materials that you're teaching at that time. They might have already learned it. I've had students that start studying philosophy in middle school. You know, things like that that I had never really thought of, and I found interesting, and I was able to use that as a tool. So when I know that my students, you know, were experts in a certain area that I hadn't taught some of my traditional students, I would use that as an advantage, and I would, you know, call out on that student. I would ask them to share information that they had already learned. And also learning about your students helps you to identify anyone who might be struggling, because there might be other things going on that don't show or don't present themselves in the classroom. But if you get to know a little bit about their lifestyle, about their home life, it goes a long way. You might know that a student is, their parents are getting divorced, for example, and their grades are suffering. Maybe they have a lack of attention in the classroom. It could be outside influences. So if you ever, once again, if you ever see students that are struggling and you're not sure what to do, reach out to the student, talk to them if you can. If they're younger in the elementary school setting, reach out to their parent and guardian. They can oftentimes shed light on different things that are going on at home. And once again, that communication, always key. So once you get the information from students, you've communicated to the parents, you've communicated with your colleagues, now you want to know, okay, what do I do? Now that I know that my students, need differentiated instruction, what does that mean? What do I do? Here's where you make an action plan. And your student, like I put here, you don't need to go through a classification process for a student. Sometimes I know, different educators might say, the student isn't getting it, they're struggling, maybe we should send them for some educational testing, which is okay, and that's fine. That's why we have, every school has their own process of how they identify students. But you don't have to necessarily go through that, because it could honestly be just as simple as changing their seat in the classroom. It could be making their own personalized learning plans that you just do on your own. So what does that mean, a personalized learning plan? I'll show you in just a moment a little bit about what that means. But it's really goal setting for your students. Having student-led conferences, it's a great way at the middle school and high school level to connect with your students. Even if it takes 5 minutes for each student to meet with. It might take 1 or 2 days depending how big your classes are, but at the end of each marking period or at the end of each progress report, let's say, having a little one-to-one with your students helps to give you information, and it helps also give the students a little bit of ownership over their own grades, over their own student work. So a personalized learning plan. So what I mean by that is finding out what your students' strengths are, what their challenges are, what their preferences and needs are. And there's a difference between all of those. As you see it here, and you can see the source below. So if you ever want to access this a little bit later, just copy and paste the link. But strengths, challenges. So finding out what those strengths are of your students. It could be that that student is an excellent reader, but as you see with the challenges, they have a hard time visualizing what they read or what they hear. So for this student, you might, as it says here, preferences and needs. They might need to have a hard copy instead of having something just reading on the screen. They might need to be in a quiet place to focus and be able to kind of visualize the text that they're reading. Okay, as far as expressing and engagement, you can look here a little bit, but it says that some kids, are very good at organizing. information and planning their time. But this one particular student also gets overwhelmed when trying to listen to multiple people at once. So already you can see with this type of student, they're going to need a little bit of a quiet space to read in. They're also going to want to work maybe just one-on-one. They might just want to work with one partner versus a large group. It's getting to know those types of things where you can say, okay, you know, I know that Jack and Elizabeth, they need to work, you know, in pairs. And I know that, you know, 4 other students in the classroom, they work best in groups. So knowing that can help you with your planning, can help you with your lessons, and be able to have different groups going on at the same time. And everyone is learning the same content, but they're learning it and accessing it a different way. If you are working in an elementary school setting, you want to set goals for your students. So here's just a snapshot of some of the goals that maybe you're working on with kindergartners. Taking turns, working in a group setting, being able to raise their hand when they speak, having respect for one another, all important goals. And every student might have a little bit of a different goal. So you might not necessarily have these same goals for everyone, or you might, and then be able to take notes on the side about each student. Something that I've seen a lot of my colleagues doing in the classroom is keeping a checklist with them. And it could have daily goals, it could have weekly goals, or unit goals, for example. And they keep a checklist of students when they show examples of them getting the content, of knowing when students have actually accomplished certain goals. Doing that and then reviewing it later on, if you have planning time built into your day, look at your students, see if anyone is struggling, if someone has more check marks than others. So it's a great way to kind of keep track of how your students are doing on a daily basis. So if you have students, you have a classroom, and you have kids all over the place academically, this is where scaffolding really helps out. So something that I've used in the classroom and I've seen other people is doing pre-reading strategies, and this works K through 12 as far as pre-reading. Very important when you're having students that are having difficulty accessing certain text or levels of text. Do some pre-reading strategies with them. Give them an overview of what you're about to read, or present them with the content or key vocabulary ahead of time. And as I've mentioned, it works really across the grades levels. These types of strategies are so key when you're working with English language learners, when you're working with students with disabilities. It's really front-loading all the information as much as possible. So when they do get that text, that paragraph that they have to read and then understand, they've already heard these words multiple times. So now they know what they're reading about, and then you can assist them understanding the rest of information that might be surrounding the key words, the key vocabulary. So some of the ways you do this is chunking your text into smaller portions at a time. I once had professional development with someone that said, don't ever water down your text. And as a new teacher, I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I figured, well, if a student can't understand this level of text, then I must give them something else at a different reading level or below reading level, below grade level. And that person shared with me, they were like, no, you don't want to water down text, because if you water it down, they're never going to access or reach that level that they need to. So some of the strategies that I've learned to use is chunking. So if a student gets overwhelmed with a large paragraph, then make sure that you give them 1 or 2 sentences at a time. It'll take longer, okay? And so something you need to remember that when you're working with students that are struggling, you need to kind of always, you want to stay within a unit plan if you're trying to stay within a certain amount of days, let's say, for a unit. But you have to remember it's going to take longer. It's going to take a little more time for your students to sometimes reach those goals. And it doesn't mean that your students can't meet the same goals as others. It just means it'll take them a little bit longer. So giving them small portions of text will assist them. Annotating text. Telling your students to write a question mark in the margins if they don't understand something. All those types of things will help you know whether your students are on task or whether they need more assistance. And also providing them with alternate versions. You know, when it comes to reading, when it comes to text, it doesn't always have to be just words, just sentences. Using graphic novels, comic books, native language text. So if you know that you have a majority of students that speak Spanish, try to see if there's a translated edition of a certain book that maybe you're reading. You always want to give them access to both. You want to give them access, if it's possible, to their native language, but you also want to make sure that you are sharing the English version with the students if they're learning English, because you don't want to just say, okay, you only will learn in Spanish, because they're here to learn English as well. You can do both. And as I mentioned, students will learn to use native language to support their learning of the English language. So make sure you use, like I said, lots of images, lots of graphic novels. Newspapers are a great versions of text too. It's something that they see on a daily basis. But very important, if you see a student struggling, stop the lesson. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? The worst thing really you can do is to see a student struggling or multiple students struggling and say, well, we got to get through it. I got to get to such and such spot by the end of the week. Don't do that. Take the time to stop and find out where your students are struggling. Because oftentimes, if it's just one student that you see struggling, there might be another one that just hasn't said anything, and they need a little bit of help as well. And I've done this. I've stopped lessons in the middle of it when I saw that some students just weren't getting the concepts, especially when you're teaching history to high school students or American history to students that have never studied American history. You need to sometimes pause, take a step back, and repeat yourself if you have to, reteach something a different way, and students will catch up. Students will also appreciate that you took the time to stop a lesson and help them actually learn something, and not just go past it, because then they'll never learn it. So some of the strategies that you can use in the classroom, the SIOP model, this was introduced to me by a colleague that does wonders in her classroom. She has English language learners and students with disabilities in there, and she was able to scaffold instruction and built it into her daily practice where students knew what to expect. Students were annotating text, they were asking questions, and they were interacting with the same level text as the general ed population. And it was something that when I saw it in action, my eyes were opened. Open to how much building background is important for students, how much interaction with your students is important, and the use of realia. So using different tools. If you're reading, if you're going to be reading a book with your students about, let's say, it could be, for example, A Long Walk to Water, which is being used in middle schools. So for that, bringing in buckets of water, bringing in different tools, different scents, different objects that will kind of give students the background and the images and things that they can think about when they read later on about those things. The realia, the use of actual items for them to use is so important. They can now associate things with something physical. They have a memory now that they've built. So when they're reading a brand new text, it's not completely unfamiliar to them. They can connect it with different past lessons that you've done with them, background building that you've done with them. So definitely the source there that I gave you, cal.org, has a great page and just tons of links dedicated to SIOP model, how to implement it, and view some videos of teachers actually using it in the classroom. So if you haven't heard of SIOP and you have a classroom that has ENL students in it, please, please, please look it up, because you're going to have your eyes opened when it comes to what it is and how it helps students learn. Some of the other tools you can use nowadays is technology, of course. So what we're doing right now, with this webinar, using Google Classrooms. I would look into, if your school district isn't already using Google Apps for Education, reach out to your tech personnel and see if that's something that you can get started in your school. But it's Google Apps for Education that you would have to look up, and setting up Google Classrooms. I have seen teachers use this, once again, in elementary school, in middle school, in high school, and it's a great tool to use with your students in the classroom, and also another way to communicate with parents, because parents want to know, what is my child studying? What are they learning? What do they need to know for an upcoming exam? So Google Classroom will definitely help you with that. Have Weebly pages if you have Weebly, Class Dojo accounts, and all these things. You can honestly just Google it and you'll find it come up as far as how to use it. Class Dojo, though, a great tool for just getting students to engage in the lesson. It helps out a lot with classroom management. Kids actually get awarded points. They can hear the points if you have it connected to a smart board, and you can keep track of how students are participating in your lessons. You have Newsella, which will take just recent topics that are out in the newspapers and in the news, and it'll have it at different lexile levels for your students. So everyone can access the same content. All it's going to do is minimize the amount of words that they might see on the page. So a great tool to use for English language learners as well, even incoming students that are just brand new to the country. Flipgrid and Kahoot, other engagement tools, and I'm going to review a few of these in the next couple of slides. So Flipgrid, this one I learned about this year actually. I was observing a colleague and they used it in a middle school ELA classroom, and it was wonderful. I love learning from my fellow colleagues as well. So Flipgrid allows you to have a grid basically on a computer or on an iPad or on a smartboard, and as a teacher you're able to establish your own URL, and this is a unique URL that's given to you. You share that with your students. You can also share it with parents if you want, so you can give them open access to showing them what you're doing in the classroom. You add topics or themes or questions. So the teacher I had seen typed a question related to the text that they had been doing. And what this teacher did was they posted a question and wanted the students to respond to the question. So sometimes you have students in the classroom that don't want to raise their hand. They don't want to speak out in front of others. They are very shy. And in this particular case, it's middle school. So you can imagine a lot of students that, get shy in front of others, don't want to speak up in front. And you want to make sure that students are on topic, that they're on task, that they are engaged. So one way to do this is using Flipgrid. Basically, in this classroom, they use their Chromebooks, and the Chromebooks have a webcam, and they recorded themselves responding. So make sure that with Flipgrid that you can do that, and they can record themselves. Google Classroom, once again, so see if your school district has a Google app. There's free professional development on the Google website, but oftentimes in-house, you might have teachers that are already using it that you might not know of, so ask them and see if they're familiar with Google Classroom. But what it allows you to do is students can submit assignments virtually, they can participate in chats, they can take online quizzes. I've seen it used in the classroom where we used it actually in the alternative high school setting, where we had some students that for a variety of reasons maybe were going to be absent for an extended time. This student was able to still stay engaged and stay on task, and when they came back to the alternative high school, they were right on board with what they needed to do, as far as they didn't miss out on the topics that were learned in class because the teacher uploaded everything to Google Classroom. So the student remained engaged, remained on time with assignments and units because of Google Classroom. So it really allows you to assist your students that may be hospitalized or students that need home instruction for a short amount of time. This is where Google Classroom really helps out with when you have alternative education settings. And then flexible grouping. This I've seen a lot in elementary school, but you can also really incorporate this at any level. And it's not just having groups or group work in the classroom. It's a lot more than that. It's definitely specific to a lesson that you might be doing, but it allows for small group instruction or direct instruction with all of your students on a rotating schedule. So what that means is that you might start a topic, or you might be reading a text, or you might be working on a certain, let's say, math topic with your students, and you have specialized stations in your room that students rotate. But the goal is for you to have direct contact with students in a small group setting. So you specifically as a teacher get to work with maybe 4 or 5 students that might need a little bit more help or a little bit more assistance on learning a topic, while the other students have self-directed stations that they are still learning, and you will have time to check in with them, but they are able to work a little bit more independently. It allows you to really work with students that have different learning styles or individual needs. So you might have students that, once again, they might access a topic and get it very quickly. They can serve as a little bit of a mini teacher, if you want to say. They can also work independently, maybe move on for a little bit more advanced work while you're working with the smaller group. At the end of flexible grouping, though, you always have whole group instruction to kind of bring everyone back, make sure that everyone's on board, and that you can move on. And here we have, as I've mentioned, the differentiation, what it is, what it isn't. So you can just do a little bit of comparing here. And like I said, I love infographics. It helps me learn, and it also helps students learn. So if you can ever make an infographic, you should definitely do it. It's easy to do. You just look it up how to do infographics. But here, differentiation is not a synonym for group work. So that's something I definitely want to kind of key in, that it doesn't mean you're just going to have different groups in your room. That's not what it means. What it really does mean is that you are looking for whole group, small group, maybe individual tasks that are based on content and student needs. And it's really it's student focused. At the end of the day, you need to make sure that every lesson, every unit is going to be student focused, because if it's not, then you're not focusing on the key part of education is the student. And that's really it as far as me speaking and sharing the resources out with you. But at this point, if anyone has any questions, I'd love to either answer those questions. You can feel free to put them into the chat bar there. And if you can't think of anything right now, you know, right off the top of your head, that's totally okay. I've included here some of my contact information. And I included here my personal email address. It's just much easier to reach me there. You know, I always have it accessible. So even if you can't think of a question right now, you might think of something come September, you know, because you might still be in beach mode, and that's okay. But I am here to help. I really am. And even if you want to set up some kind of connection or you want to give me a phone call, reach out to me by email, and I can definitely help out with anything.
Thank you so much, Diane. And as people are thinking about anything they might want to ask right now, we do have a couple of questions here. So someone wanted to know, what is a Twitter chat? I've heard of this before, but no one really has told me what it is, and I'm sort of been afraid to ask.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I'm glad that you weren't afraid to ask, because now I can answer it. So a Twitter chat, I've participated in it maybe once or twice. I really have to get better with Twitter, I'll be honest. I follow a lot of people on Twitter. I don't post or tweet as often as I should. I'm really more of a Facebook person. But a Twitter chat is when you're following a hashtag. So one of the hashtags that I included, I think, was EdChat. And I've seen ones for like L's. I've seen ones that are LChat. So it's the hashtag. So if it's hashtag EdChat, people will sometimes log in all at the same time on Twitter. So let's say there's a Twitter chat going on tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Everyone logs in to Twitter at the same time. Someone usually starts it off and says, my name is Diane. I live in New York. Glad to be part of this hashtag EdChat. And then people start responding to that. And when you click on the hashtag, because it usually turns blue in the Twitter search bar, if you click on it, you'll see all these people that are also doing EdChat. And you can follow, sometimes they'll throw out ideas or they'll put questions out. And it's a really great way to, one, connect with other people that are in education. And you can find sometimes specific Twitter chats. So as I mentioned, there's one that's hashtag LCHAT, so ELLCHAT. This one, I've seen a lot of great people like Andrea Honingsfeld. She works out of Malloy College. She's written tons of books, and she's a person who usually participates in those. And it's a great way to learn about co-teaching in the classroom if you're working with ENLs. It also is about different strategies to use in the classroom, or it could be just even about politics or something that's going on that's affecting English language learners. So these are all different hashtags that you can follow and then participate in a conversation. That's essentially what it is. It's an ongoing conversation that people all log in at the same time to kind of get involved with.
And then just another question here. It's actually related to your infographic. Someone says, I noticed the IEPs for all in terms of what differentiation is not. Can you share more thoughts on that?
Right. So I did share about personalized learning plans, which if you look at it and you're just like, oh, okay, that's kind of like an IEP. It's more than that. So when it says differentiation is not an IEP for all, it's that you can use different strategies for small groups of students. It doesn't need to be that every single student needs a personalized learning plan. You might want to do that if you have a small classroom and you only have, let's say, 10 students in it. You might want to make a personalized learning plan and have different goals for your students. Or you might have all the same goals, but a personalized learning plan just gives you different ways to reach that goal. Where an IEP, you go through a formal process. It's a legal document. It's something that you have to implement, you have to follow. Also, you have routine follow-up meetings when it comes to an IEP. It's a student that is receiving special education services. So there might be a diagnosis connected to an IEP. There might be different exams that are done from a school psychologist, or it could be a social worker. So it's a lot more, I want to say, detailed than IEP. And like I said, it's a legal standing document. So differentiation doesn't mean that you need to go and do that process for every single student. Once again, it's a legal binding document, and there are a lot of education laws that are connected to an IEP, which is an individualized education plan. A PLP, personalized learning plan, is something that you're doing on your own to support your students. And once again, it doesn't mean every single person needs a different plan. It just means you might be more aware of what some students need versus other students.
Diane, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much on behalf of St. Joseph's College, the Office of Alumni Engagement, and of course, Institutional Advancement. We're so grateful for your time, your expertise, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Tara, and I really appreciate everyone joining in today. And once again, if you think of something, please reach out to me at my email address, or you can reach out to the Office of Alumni Engagement. They have my contact information as well. And like I said, I'm really excited that I was able to share out with all of you. I hope that some of these things can be useful to you come September. Some people start even before Labor Day. So I hope that everyone has a successful school year. And thank you so much for the opportunity, St. Joseph's. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Be on the lookout for our webinar survey. We will be asking you for input on more topics related to education and other webinars. We do want your feedback, and we do utilize and implement it. So thank you so much for all of your participation in this webinar series, and we hope that you join us soon. Thank you so much, Diane, and everyone have a great rest of your day. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.